Hi there. Vaccines in China are deeply mired in the crisis of trust as public concerns about safety continue in the wake of recent scandals. President Xi Jinping and Premier Keqiang have both demanded thorough investigation into the country's latest vaccine scandal and severe punishment for those accountable. How does the series of scandals reflect the authorities' accountability and crisis management skills? After years of food and drug safety controversies, how do we prevent such tragedies from occurring again? And how can public trust be restored? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Keqiang, attorney at Anjie Law Firm, Harvey Zordin, senior research fellow from the Center of China Globalization, and Atul Aneja, associate editor of The Hindu. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. Why do you think the public were so angry about the scandal of this Changsheng biotechnology company based in Jilin?
I think there are two reasons. The first one is today, for Chinese people, the priority is really getting healthy. People care so much about the healthcare system, right? After people get so much income, people naturally really care about the safety of their children or the health issues. The second reason, I think, it's really a shock. I think for a while, for the last couple of years, the kind of concern, the kind of like a public scandal about safety in the drug or food field seems to ease a little bit. You have not really heard that much new scandals. A few years ago you heard so many things, but for a while we thought the problem really get controlled. Okay, but however, when the children vaccine, the whole scandal came up, people are so shocked that wow, this is still there, and plus it's really affect our children. I think that's the reason people really reacted.
President Xi Jinping and Premier Keqiang have both drawn the red line for pharmaceutical producers. This is the line you cannot cross. Otherwise, there is the issue of accountability. People would have to be brought to justice. So what do you think of the impact?
I think the tragedy of all these kinds of incidents have been like the 1993 movie Groundhog Day, where you have these incidents happening over and over and over again, milk and baby formula and water and a lot of other things. So I think that it was extraordinary for President Xi Jinping to interrupt his trip to Africa to make what is a very, very strong statement. So I think this over and over and over again is going to stop on his watch, because this is not only about drugs, it's about trust in the government, and this is very important.
And what do you think of this confidence crisis?
Well, I think China domestically has raised expectations of the people of what they need to expect from the state. In certain areas, in terms of image, China has set a very high standard for itself. In certain soft areas, when there's an issue like this, I think there is a crisis. There is a gap in expectations. People expect the state and the government and the authorities to take up and to ensure that such kind of issues, which have a huge domestic human impact, as was stated by the other guest, that this is not acceptable, because the people in China now are very cautious and have very high expectations of themselves and of their government. So I think it's reflecting several layers at the same time. Right from the image of the state has of itself to the expectations of the people. It also shows in a way that the transition which China is undergoing right now, with several moving parts at the same time.
Despite the tsunami media coverage about the scandal, there was a strong note of irony concerning how the scandal has broken out. It's in fact infighting or dogfights within the company, the Changsheng biotechnology company based in Jilin, that led to the so many stories that went viral on the internet. It's not because of the investigative reporting of journalists. Therefore, the next question is, who should have played a far stronger role in exercising effective oversight so that such scandals would be prevented?
It has to be the government. It has to be government. Now, look, for this case, for this scandal, it's actually getting complicated. It's not like a counterfeit drug that actually led to tragedy of death. Okay, fortunately, that has not happened yet. This is more like a quality issue. So that's why, legally speaking, when you look at it, at least based on what we have seen so far, it's actually designated as a drug of inferior quality. Okay, so under the law, it really requires a showing of serious harm. Now, it's actually hidden deeper. If you know technical people, if you know people actually consistently make regular checks of the quality, it's very hard to detect this kind of problem. It's very hard. So that's why the government really have to put in enough resources, have a very rigorous system to check, to make sure the quality of the vaccines can be regularly monitored. But that takes a system of resources.
In a private conversation, a friend of mine briefed me. In fact, it's remarks off the record, but I wouldn't mention his name. He said back in the 1980s, China was able to enjoy free imports or vaccines from a neighboring country of Japan. It might be, the free imports of vaccines might be part of the ODA, Overseas Development Agency's compensations due to the war atrocities that the Japanese committed during the Second World War. However, such free gifts were stopped later in the 1990s, and only the homegrown pharmaceuticals, particularly vaccines, should be supplied to children. Now, why did we have to carry out this law or regulations to prevent our own nationals from enjoying free gifts? At the same time, so many young Chinese parents say they have lost their faith in medicines that are domestically produced.
Well, I think there's multiple dimensions to the entire problem. Okay, on the one hand, you do have for any country you have actually got to have an industry policy. I think probably China for a while probably really proud to have their own domestic manufacturer to provide the vaccines without relying on a foreign-made vaccines. Even after this scandal, actually I'm certain China still want to build a very strong domestic industry. Now the problem is that how are you going to really make sure your domestic industry do a right job? Okay, it will be really unthinkable China completely rely on the foreign suppliers.
But I'm afraid the embarrassment and the core of the issue is, in many places there is this compulsory health system for kindergarten and primary schools. Unless you can have the certificate of being vaccinated with the homegrown vaccines, you won't be admitted to the primary schools or the kindergartens.
But that's something that a responsible society should do, and many societies do that. It's the responsibility, though, of the people who are making the regulations to make sure that the vaccinations and other drugs meet certain minimum standards of both safety and efficacy.
Well, the point is that they require it got to be vaccinated by the locally made vaccine. That's industry policy.
This is part of the problem. I have every reason to believe that the central government has a very strong policy in this regard. But I think as you get further away from Beijing or get to more local levels of government, that some people would rather hide some mistakes than come clean. And I think the system needs to find a way to encourage people to come clean. In our country, one of the ways we do this is through whistleblowers, people on the inside who are in a position to report these kinds of things, and sometimes are rewarded. Sometimes they're killed, but mostly they're rewarded, but at great personal risk sometimes. We need that. We need more legal protection for those people. For instance, in our country, we have various ways of suing these companies to not only make them pay millions of dollars in judgment, but also to ruin their public image, which deserves to be ruined when they serve up vaccines that are ineffective or worse.
You are an Indian correspondent. India is a democracy. The independence of the media there deserves credit for their guts and bravery in making investigations into scandals. Now, can you brief us on some of the stories that Indian journalists have done to bring bad people to justice, particularly in the case of pharmaceuticals?
Frankly, I can't see of any headline story of this kind. We did have an issue with oral polio vaccines in around 2016. Now this is an oral dose which was given to children, and it was made all over, universally applied in the country. Now there were incidents not in the quality of the vaccine, but in the downstream impact. For example, if a child had been administered that vaccine, now the vaccine means that the strain, there is a polio strain in that, but that is so weak that the immune system then overpowers that and you get the immunity. But in the excretion of that particular vaccine elements, the polio vaccine, the polio elements or the germs sort of mutated on their own and caused another secondary polio vaccination somewhere else. So it's not a question specifically of the vaccine, but because of its usage and certain untested downstream impact, that it, instead of, while it saved a lot of lives, but it also caused certain incidents to take place as well. So this was something, you know, which was a wake-up call, that when you do your trials, you have to think through all the elements and test the vaccine in its entire life cycle, even in the post-vaccination stage. So that's one story which came around now 2016. But otherwise, I think vaccination story in India has been pretty good. It takes a long time for a vaccine to be validated, but in the end, generally, it's a good story. For example, 60% of the vaccines which go to the UNICEF, for example, are going from India now. We do have big multinational corporations doing the vaccine development, but one of the biggest companies is an Indian company which makes the rabies vaccines. So I do think that the vaccination story in India generally has been a good one, as has been with the generic drugs. But yes, there have been incidents of this kind, which I know. There may be more, which I cannot recall right now.
Do you know vaccines and the pharmaceuticals in India have become a big story at this moment in China due to the popularity of a very successful and box office hit. It's called Dying to Survive. It's in fact the black humor of this movie that has alerted the general public to the ugly and nasty fact that anti-cancer drugs in China are very expensive. People have discussed extensively as to why we have this skyrocketing price of the medicines that are supposed to cure lethal diseases. So the next question is, Premier Keqiang has demanded zero import duty for anti-cancer drugs, particularly those from India. Why, according to UNICEF reports, up to 60 to 70% of free medicines, or cheap medicines, come from India?
Yes.
Why?
Well, one of the reasons is the patents issue. The Indian government did not recognize the patents for generic drugs, in the sense that if you had a medicine which was produced somewhere else,
then the Indian government would have been sued.
It was a legislation which was passed, and the case, I think that the WTO has now got involved with this, and under Trump we are having this issue about it. But the big story is that a patent, especially if it was 5 years old, you know, if you had a patent which has lasted for 5 years' time, then you could reverse engineer it and make your drugs. And that's one of the reasons. Apart from that is cheap labor costs and a good pool of pharmacologists and technicians. So as a result of that, we did that, and the success story really was revealed when the AIDS issue came up in Africa, where the cost of the cocktail to treat AIDS fell from approximately $10,000 to around $200, mainly because of the same medicines which are produced abroad were being produced in India at such a low cost. And that's been the basis for the Indian success story in the pharma sector.
By the way, congratulations on the remarkable improvement of the Indian image after the release of this popular movie, Dying to Survive. By the way, India has been demanding opening of China's IT and the pharmaceutical sectors as part of measures to reduce a $50 billion trade deficit in over $84 billion bilateral trade. But when it comes to the issue of how to import more of the Indian medicines, you need to have a license, first of all, from the China Drug Administration. How difficult is it to have this license?
Well, that depends on the regulations and how strict the regulations are in China. But Indian medicines are being exported to countries all over the world, including the United States, UK, and Russia. And we have, the FDA is the regulatory authority in the United States, and these have been passing through those very stringent tests.
Is it true that the Indian pharmaceutical companies have all been acquired by very expensive, renowned overseas multinationals, particularly those in the West?
No,
you don't think so?
In fact, the reverse has been the case. The MNCs were the ones which are dominating the Indian market for a very long time. But then you see the share of the Indian companies, especially with the generic drugs which were made, are basically Indian companies. So it's a huge success story of Indian talent actually doing great work in terms of adoption of technology, and then also the marketing side of it as well, of actually ensuring that these drugs are provided domestically through the right channels and then exported across the world. So I think it's a reverse in the case of India. MNC domination at one time being gradually sort of denuded over time, though I do think that with Mr. Modi's new policy of wanting foreign investment to come in, the MNCs will make a comeback again more prominently in the Indian market. It'll be good competition.
I know many people in China very well who take Indian drugs, and they're very happy with them and with the price. I think the tension in China is between protectionism or growing Chinese pharmaceutical industries, and also, on the other hand, having a ready supply of high-quality drugs from another country. And maybe China needs to think in geopolitical terms. This could be a confidence-building measure between India and China to improve the bilateral relations, to share the technologies, and to fast-track certain drugs, not only cancer drugs, but others that are very expensive here. I think it's a win-win for both countries.
Well, I think the importation of the Indian, the generics or generics made by other countries could help, right? Probably lower the price or provide some quality products. But it's very clear, in China, I think the policymakers recognize there are actually multiple policy goals. One of the big things is that China really trying to encourage innovation in pharmaceutical industry. China, in fact, more and more companies want to be innovative. They don't want to just do the generics anymore. In fact, think about it. In the world, there are about 20,000 diseases who have no drug to fix. You actually need to require lots more innovation to do this job. And the pricing is one of the big issues. At the same time, you've got to make sure the investors, the originators, have enough resources to do the R&D, to have the right return. In fact, the IP protection is actually becoming a bigger issue, actually given a much bigger priority in the Chinese policies.
So maybe you can have a layered approach when it comes to very high-end biologic, biomedicine, genetically made medicine. Now that's a high-end level, and where China, it's part, in fact, of Made in China 2025. That can be one part of it, which is reserved for the Chinese. Whereas when it comes to something like the cancer drugs, which is not rocket science anymore. I mean, that's
probably not true, actually. Cancer drugs still require a lot of developments.
Exactly.
For some of the patents that are going to be, some of the patented drugs that are leaving the period of protection, and probably generics has a lot of things to do. Generics and the originator drugs, they are like a source, and what's a follow through. Okay, they're actually not enemies. Okay, without the originator drugs, hey, the generics, you have no generics right down the road.
Yeah.
So it's a very hard decision for the government to make. So for the healthcare industry, it's actually there are lots of things are coming to into play. The IP system, the healthcare insurance plan, everything.
I'll tell you another one, and it's not much talked about, but traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. Many people ask me often in a month, how can we get traditional Chinese medicine to Europe or this place or that place? And this needs innovation, because the problem is the quality control, and also where required the clinical testing. TCM could be a huge market for China overseas, but it's one that hasn't been developed yet. Nobody's talking about this.
I want to ask a question about TCM and the reputation, credibility, standard of the TCM practitioners. What do you think of the influence of TCM from Indian perspective?
I think so. I think as an Indian, you sort of understand the system very well, because in India we have another system of traditional medicine called Ayurveda, which is very effective. And actually yoga is a part of the larger Ayurveda stream. One is from the preventive side, another is from the curative side. So, in China you have the TCM, which is also developed from Taoist principles of yin and yang, and then taken forward. So as an Indian, I see a great merit, because Ayurveda is doing some great work in India. I see no reason why TCM not only can be relevant, especially things like acupuncture, etc. I think these are very, very innovations of civilizational China, and to take it forward, to take Harvey's point forward, that as you get more testing science into it, I think this can be a very, very important healthcare, indigenous healthcare system.
Really got to bring more technology innovation to the TCM. Okay, TCM is not a myth. People used to think it's a myth, but now actually, if you want to do very good TCM, actually requires you using the modern technology.
I think the lady who won the malaria Nobel Prize, what happened was that she isolated the molecule which acts again from traditional Chinese organic products. Right. So it's a great application.
It's a very good
of science.
beginning. It deserves credit, of course. The case in 2016, Mr. Keqiang, has caused a public outcry when it was revealed that the 570 million yuan of improperly stored or expired vaccines have been illegally sold across the country. However, those perpetrators of this crime were only fined, and in fact, let's go back to the Shenzhen-listed biotechnology company based in Jilin, the Changchun company. It was also only fined some 5.1 million yuan, while at the same time it harvested over 500 million yuan from its sales. So what do you think of the punishment itself? This time around, senior executives of Changchun, a biotechnology company, have been put under investigation at this moment, a pending investigation. So what do you think would be the consequences?
Now look, there's probably some loopholes in the current the regulations. In China, you distinguish between counterfeit drug versus the drugs of inferior quality. For the drugs of inferior quality, the maximum actually is 3 times, the fine of illegal turnover. Okay, I think for that case, they already give 3 times the maximum penalty fine. But in the public perception, that's not enough. Okay, people say, why are you crazy? The children's vaccine into the body, and you only just doing the fine.
So that means the law needs to be changed, because it's not strong enough. Because one of the problems here is people are too greedy, and the government does all it can to prevent that greed. But I think you have a saying in Chinese about killing the chicken to scare the monkey. I think forget about the chicken. I think you go right to the monkey. Because unless you find a way, instead of these peanut-sized civil penalties, to do severe criminal penalties of jail and more, you're not going to concentrate people's minds, and you have to do that. We're talking about health. We're talking about people's lives, and especially talking about children's lives.
Harvey,
people demand nothing less.
Harvey, I'm glad you mentioned the Chinese proverb, to kill the chicken and deter the monkey. We also have a Chinese popular saying, 乱世用重点. In times of upheaval or turbulence, we need to turn to high-handed laws and punishment. Therefore, this time around, do you think someone from the Changchun company would be given the death penalty to ease the public concerns?
That will probably require some evidence, because under the law, only, if they are considered making counterfeit drug, then the penalty is very severe. But now, I mean, for whoever going to defend the company, they're probably going to say, hey, we have evidence to show this is not counterfeit drug. It's not like a fake drug. They are still drugs, but just not just effective. So there's a distinction. No law is law, okay? You know, we have to say
evidence depends on
the scientific
definition of words such as substandard drugs, inferior drugs,
yes,
ineffective vaccines. That they have a lot to do with the severity of the punishment, right?
Correct.
And therefore, it seems that Changsheng biotechnology company only sell ineffective vaccines, and they argue strongly that a few cases of death, an infantile death.
That would be the defense. That would be the defensive arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they have hundreds of thousands of cases of ineffective drugs. And I find it ironic that the name of this company in Chinese means long life. But it must apply only to their executives, because it doesn't apply to all the people whose lives that they've negatively affected. And I think that the book should be thrown at them.
Right.
And I think the book needs to be rewritten to be made stronger for future cases.
But isn't it true that ineffective vaccines would mean death in most probability for children if they live in times of, for example, SARS or very lethal, very devastating pandemics?
Absolutely.
Because that would be probably more of opinion by the experts.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case
and also because it lowers, if you have a weak immune system and then you have ineffective drugs, it's absolutely lethal. So
in the case of rabies, it's 100% sure if you don't get proper treatment with proper vaccines, you're dead. In the case of these other drugs for diphtheria and whooping cough and the other, that it's not so sure. But what is sure, that those drugs may not be effective. It's like taking a placebo and nothing. So now all those hundreds of thousands of people have to get revaccinated.
Right.
Gentlemen, towards the end of this very dynamic discussion about the poor vaccines in Jilin, I'd like to have your advice very quickly, each of you, about how to quickly restore public trust and faith in not only Chinese pharmaceuticals but also the Chinese authorities, particularly at the local level. Now, what should be done to improve the public trust?
Deterrence is the first step.
Legal deterrence.
Legal deterrence, probably changing the law. You know, the past the scandals already caused a lot of transformation of the laws in this area dealing with the counterfeit drugs. So we're probably going to see that again this time to deal with the standard.
New and stronger laws that make the penalties much more severe from the NPC and the CPC.
deterrence plus an overall review, not just of this company, but of the entire pharma sector, especially vaccination sector. That needs to be reviewed, just to find out if there are any structural reasons why this has happened.
What about the media's role? The media, should they be given the supervisory functions, and their tasks should be enhanced remarkably? Now, this time around, it seems it's the social media that has played a pivotal role in generating attention from highest authorities.
I think media and the whistleblower should be encouraged, because for this kind of very technical problems, you really need someone insider to report, and the media will be naturally the first one they can go to.
Right. The professionalism of both the media and pharmaceuticals is badly needed to seriously improve the authority of the watchdog. I will see you next time. Goodbye.